However, this Bradley, was originally done for a project. It's actually pretty straightforward, but people were surprised and asking how to do this. Then I realized the spline is not possible for particle system, meaning that you cannot get hair particles on splines. So basically, you just have to use animation nodes. And here is what this tutorial is made about. I'm going to use the preset library because it makes both your and my life easier. You can download it from the link in the description and it's free. So let's start. For convenience, I'm not going to do a very detailed leaves or whatever stuff. I'm just going to do a very kind of simplified version and you will know how it looks like. So basically, I need firstly a spline. So let's just delete all the vertices and you can draw whatever splines because it will just be procedural. So maybe this should be good enough. Yeah, I think this is good enough. And then I'm going to get a comb. Next thing is very straightforward. I'm going to instancing points on these splines. Basically like a generate particle system while the particle system is not really available, whatever. So I'm going to use the preset which is called instancing on spline. And then I'm going to use the loop version. Pretty straightforward because I'm going to only work with one spline at this moment. And let's take a look with the 3D viewer. And you will see what we actually generate. So now we actually generate 50 points, which is very nice. And you can basically put instancing objects node, put the matrices into the transformation, and let's select our comb. And finally, mesh objects output. So now we have a lot of combs being generated. Where's our combs? So now you can see our combs, but it's actually a little bit, the orientation is rather wrong. So what we are going to do is basically take an offset matrices. And you can hit use, go to advanced settings, change to the local axis, local pivot. I think this is the way to go. And just try to rotate it to a degree and try to find a degree that you wish. So this is roughly kind of getting sampling results. If you think the points is too much, then you just get it 25 or something like that. So this is kind of basic idea, and both of the nodes like instancing on spline and instancing object has been discussed in my tutorials. However, here's one issue. Up to this moment, there's nothing new, but I'm going to show there's when I was making the tutorial for this instancing on spline, there's no feature talking about the interval. So I added these features because I think it's kind of important. So let's take a look with our bezel curve. So let's play the animation so that the node tree will be updated on real times. If I'm changing this curve, you can see now because I'm moving these curves and the interval between two cones becomes larger because the entire everything has to be, so there are basically only 25 cones being instanced on these splines. So it's basically a simple math. If this spline gets longer, the interval between these 25 cones will be larger and larger. On the other side, if I'm shrinking these splines, then the interval will be much smaller, and finally they are crowding each other until the intersection, and it will not stop them. Okay, so this is the issue. So it's still procedural at some level because it instances a fixed amount of points on the spline, but this is not something I want. What I'm looking for, however, is to have a fixed interval, so that now I'm actually instancing maybe about 16 cones in total for this interval. But if I'm increasing the size of these splines, it will start to instance more and more, so that a interval will be kept. This algorithm, however, is not really perfect because the main part of this subprogram or this preset is based on evaluate spline, and I don't actually know the algorithm between these two. I think neither of them are 100% accurate as you wish. I don't know why the uniform does not work, but at least for the resolution, it will based on the curvature of the spline, which means if you have the curvature, then it will be more dense, like this part or something like that. If you I don't know why uniform does not work, but maybe in the future it will be improved. So basically, the interval is not 100% perfect. You can still see the issues, but it's much better than using a fixed amount to instance object. So this is one part, and that's why I would like to discuss this. The next topic that I would like to cover is if you're kind of making a kind of leaves, then you should start with kind of large size of leaves and then scale it down at the terminal. It's basically how a branch actually works. But the question is how? And I want you to realize that basically everything in this kind of setup is basically determined by matrices. The matrices is basically an object. So if you can definitely take a look with these matrices. It determines the location, it determines the scale, it determines the rotation as well. And as we are trying to do, you can change these rotations and all these cones or leaves will be rotated. Okay. Another thing, a good part of using these offset matrices is that you have a fourth control of that. So if you put the fourth to 50%, that means all this rotation will be only exerted about 45 degree and 45 degree on Y and Z. Okay. And the fourth is a function of basically a function. It's not a single value. For example, you can take an object controller fourth. It determines a region. So only if you are in the region of my controller, this controller is just that empty, and it has been changed to sphere type so that we can easily see how its terminal looks like. So when we are looking at this function, you can see only if. So the fourth is 1 when all these matrices, the input matrices is within the region of fourth. If the input matrices is outside this fourth, then they will not be rotated. And if you change the value, they will not be affected because the fourth is 0 outside. So there are many different types of fourth. You can basically shift the A and it goes to the fourth and check there are billions of fourth, random fourth, wiggle fourth, delay fourth, and so on and so forth. But today, what I'm going to talk about is the fade fourth. Basically, it goes from the start to the end. It's called a fade fourth. The name is actually a little bit weird because it's a little bit different from what I usually think. But whatever. So let's take another offset matrices because I don't want to affect the rotations. I just want to be like this at this moment. And I'm only going to change the scale. If I change the scales to 0, then everything will be scaled down to 0 and nothing. You basically see nothing. They are there, but you just don't see them unless you clear this fourth. Okay. And I'm going to use the fade fourth. This fade fourth node is actually very similar to float range node. And basically they're really 100% the same. I use this float range node as an example because you cannot directly view the output of fourth. The output of fourth is usually very vague. In this case, I want you to realize if you directly plug this fourth into the fourth, you can see there is already a gradation that occurs. And to understand its value better, you can basically just take a look with the float range node. Both of them, they start with an amount. You need to determine amount of fourth that you have been generated. And the start value is 1, the stop value is 0. It means, and I'm going to change the type into the start and the stop. It means it will start as 1 and it will go for 10 numbers until it reaches zeros. Okay. I think it's kind of very straightforward, and this is exactly what happens to the fade fourth. here, one thing I want you to realize is that now we're actually generating about 17 points. 17 points. But if you decrease the intervals, then you are generating more points. So if we get 0.2, we're getting maybe about over 100 points, I guess. I do not know. But it's basically kind of idea. And you can see the amount of fade forth is not enough. So you have to increase the amount so that it covers actually the whole range. To do that actually is very easy. So here we can actually know the amount of points that we generated using a getLength node. GetListLength node. So you can see the amount of points is 62. You can just plug this length into the amount and it will automatically calculate everything. This feedforth node also has many other interesting features. For example, you can try to animate start and end, whatever stuff. But one important thing is that you can manipulate this start index. This start, so now we have 62 points, if you remember. If I take this start index to 62, then basically every point has been covered with a fourth value of 1. And the fourth value of 1 in this case will put everything with a scale of 0. Okay? And you can definitely increase the start index number, but it just has no more effect because it's already reaching 100%. And even if you reach 1000%, it does not actually change anything. It will be clamped at the value of 1. Okay? On the other side, if you put the value of -62, then it covers nothing on these points. If you covered the start index as 0, then it will start from the value of 1 and end the value of 0. So this is how this fade forth is actually working. And definitely you can change the interpolation as I have shown from the demonstration. I personally like exponential because it will keep more cones that reaching about maximum size. Sometimes you may be not sure about what all this interpolation looks like. So there are several ways. You can just take an interpolation input and you can hit W, goes to viewer and change the type. So now you can see this interpolation, how this looks like. There's also another node which is called as constructing interpolation. Construct. They are very similar. If you change the static mode, you can see they are actually very similar. But there are several moments it will be very different. For example, if you're using power, if you're using exponent. So if now you change the exponent, you can see it looks kind of it's not very sharp. If you try to use this constructing interpolation, you can change the exponent, you can change the base, and you can make it much sharper or whatever. So it gives kind of different looks compared to the default. All these kind of things are something that you can potentially play around with, but this is basically the principles. So here we have finished talking about the scale. The next thing I want to talk about is actually the rotation. So we've already actually discussed a part of the rotations. You just change all this rotation and you change all these things. What I want to do is add some variation. So I'm going to use Euler math. And I'm going to keep this 90 on Y and Z. Next thing is to add some other variation on this B. Here I'm going to use the Euler wiggle. Set the type into list, put the uniform into the count. It will automatically give you getListLength node. This getListLength node is the same as what we have done earlier. Actually, everything is automated. You just put these matrices into the amount. It will automatically give you the getListLength node, and their output will be the same. So you can even use the mostly initial one for the later one, so that you save one node. But it actually does not make much difference. It's just a kind of improve the maintenance of a node tree. But does it really do? I don't know. So you just put the rulers into the B. The reason I'm using this ruler wiggle instead of random ruler is you get more specific values on amplitude of x, y, z, and here the matrices is always based on the input matrices, and as we have done initially that use the U, and we've already changed the type of rotation into local axis and the local pivot, which means if I'm actually only going to rotate on Y, you can see how actually things looks. Not all the points will be rotating to the same places, or to the same direction. It's because the local axis is not the same for each point. The rotation are different. Okay. So in this case, you just give kind of whatever value that you think is kind of nice. Maybe 30 for all of them is good enough. Just giving kind of variation, I think it's good enough. Let's change the interval to maybe 0.5. I think this is kind of good enough. This is one part. So assume if we have a leaves instead of all these kind of cones. So let's just kind of cut in the middles. So let's take a look with our leaves. So now our leaves is going to one side. Okay, if it's a cone, obviously you do not realize this issue. But in reality, this should not happen because some of the leaves should go other side, right? So we need to consider about the other type of. So we need to make some of the leaves goes to the other side. In this case, I'm going to use another offset matrices. And I'm going to put the scales back to normal. And then we are going to work with rotation. And then we are going to use a function which is pretty straightforward. It's called an index mask fold. And basically just use this fold, and you can see initially we have no effect. What it does is actually it will take about every two points with a fold of 1, and the rest is just a fold of 0. So basically a yes or no question. And in such a case, you just rotate it with Z about 180 degrees, and I think it's good enough. And you do have see this effect. And you have 4 more leaves, then probably no one actually realizes what actually happens. Then you just give all these kind of leaves, which is very straightforward. This is all about it. This is really all about it. But maybe sometimes you think, or probably you think, oh, it's kind of too regular. Then you can also use the random fold. But the random fold is actually, I don't like the random fold because the random fold is any numbers between 0 and 1. Which means if you give a fold of 0.5, then it will rotate it to a kind of a very weird degree. Maybe sometimes it's not something that you like. So I think index fold, which determines the yes or no, is much more clear than the other fold. So this is basically it. Actually, there's other things that I want you to realize. A single object. So now I have a basal curve. I can duplicate that. So if I have the whole point is that if I have a collection of basic curve, how can I evaluate them? So this is the issue. So first, let's put everything into the new collection. Collection section should be good enough. So how can I procedurally instancing all these points on from the curve in a collection? Okay. There is a node which is called Splines from object. So if I take this so I can take an object, a curve object, and it will get a spline. So you cannot select any other mesh, it will not work. It will tell you that, so if I choose this target, the target is basically the leaf that I generated, then it will tell you that it's not a curve object. So you have to choose a curve object. So this is one part. The second part is that it will actually give you splines. And I want you to realize the instancing on spline loop is working on a single spline. It's not a plural. So the plural actually cannot go into the spline because this node cannot receive multiple. If you would like to make this socket receive a plural, you have to use another node. It's called instancing on spline list. So the list node is to receive the plural because it has spline list. But if you use this node, it will also cause another issue. So let's put the matrices instead. So I'm going to put a collection info and take the collection. In this collection, I'm having two objects. Both of them are curve objects. And you can realize that now this is the term that the splines from object node does not receive a plural. The plural does not go into a singular. Which means you have to use the loop. So select this node. I'm going to hit W, goes to loop through all objects. Then we generate a loop. So within this loop will be run 2 times because I have 2 objects. And each time within the loop, it will input a single object. Okay. I think this is good. Put a single object into objects. So the singular goes to singular. And now basically this is very much done, except the fact that we need to output this. Except the fact that we need to output these matrices. So we go to the most beginning. In this new generated output, let's hit this plus icon. So we are outputting this matrix list. And you do see we have these matrices, and you just put these matrices into place. I think it will be good. So now, within not this one. So now within this loop, we have a new matrices list output. You just put that into the transformation. It will basically do the functions. And you can definitely duplicate these nodes. Execute the node tree, it will be instanced. You can also duplicate scale it up, execute the node trees. It will basically function. I don't know actually what I'm actually generating. Whatever kind of weird structure. Or you can actually just delete all these vertices and draw another splines. Execute the node trees. It will basically do everything procedurally. So I think this is kind of nice. And up to this moment, basically everything is done. Oh, there's a little bit other issues. For example, if you're trying to work with random scale. So mostly initially we have this offset matrices node, which is important for random Euler or random rotation or the rotation variation, whichever you call. These are kind of basically the same. You can also add random scales using this node. And I'm going to use the node which is called a minimum maximum. This node has a This node has been discussed elsewhere. You should have two versions, the minimum maximum loop and the list. You should use list version. Just put the uniform into the count. So basically my version of this node will be a little bit different from yours. But once you see that node, you should be able to kind of understand what it does. And there are also tutorials talking about these nodes, so you can take a look. But I'm going to place these variant sizes into the scale and increase this percentage range so that there is a variation. You can also use the size to change the scale. So now we give kind of a variation of size. You can also increase the variation of the rotation. There are many ways that you can play around. I'm not going to discuss every part of that. Whatever. Finally, there's one thing I would like to discuss is the eevee. If you're using really a leaves, you probably know how to actually make a leaves. Just basically texturing. But if you go to eevee editing, you can see all this kind of place does not have a eevee map, because you have to load the eevee map, and then you can see all these units have its eevee map. So they get eevee map from the most initial unit that they are instanced from, so that they are sharing eevee. And in the shader, what you need to do is basically just use the eevee. So the object, I think it's a texture coordinate. So whatever you're trying to do, use this eevee. So for example, if you enable node Angular add-on, just Control T and use the eevee and add a leaves texture, and it will be fine. So basically, this is all about it. I'm afraid that I speak a little bit fast, but actually it should not be very difficult to understand. If you have any questions, you can leave the comments in this video. Yeah, I think this is all about it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.